Contrary to popular belief, birds are not actually government drones. I know, it seems crazy to think about, but that's actually just a lie perpetuated by the government to make people think spying on them costs a lot more than it really does. In reality, birds are actually just these crazy little guys that come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. There have been roughly 10,000 different species identified, with almost double that estimated to be out there in total. So what are birds? They're neat. And being as neat as they are, it only makes sense that there's always been lots of people who want to spend their precious time trying to look at as many of them as possible. Birds can be found in every terrestrial environment, and even a handful of aquatic ones. This means that humans have always existed adjacent to birds, so the idea of bird watching most likely predates civilization. But I'm not here to talk about how people back then would look at birds. I'm here to talk about looking at birds in the modern age. Like I mentioned earlier, bird watching has most likely been going on throughout the entirety of human history. But birding is the IDing and active searching for birds, almost to an obsessive extent, and has really only developed over the past 150 years or so. This is due to a wide variety of things. One being that by the late 1800s, many birds had already been taxonomically classified into the Linnaean system. This enabled the creation of field guides, with the earliest being Birds Through an Opera Glass by Florence Merriam Bailey, published in 1889 and standing as the first field guide. It's only natural that this one is horrible to use as a field guide. But I mean, come on, you gotta give Flo some credit. I mean, she was doing her best with what she had. She didn't have any frame of reference. She was writing a book, so she wrote it like how other books were. It wasn't really put together in a concise way, barely had any illustrations, but it did function technically as a field guide. There were some illustrations to show what a bird may look like, and she did describe their behaviors and typically provided some brief descriptions. But again, in terms of usefulness, it doesn't come close to the standard that we have for modern field guides. And I say modern, yet this standard was actually set 90 years ago by good old RTP himself. The first Peterson's Field Guide was a game changer. This book set the standard for field guides of all kinds after its publishing. This thing had concise text, easy to read, detailed yet simple illustrations that showed everything they needed to, comparisons between illustrations to help more accurately ID whatever bird you were looking at. This field guide was a game changer, and what's incredibly impressive about it is the one from 90 years ago could still be used as an appropriate field guide today. It may be missing some species and some information, it's still very viable. So shout out to Roger Tory Peterson. His effect on the conservation movement, as well as environmentalism as a whole, is commendable. And even though he was gone too soon to see bald eagles bounce back from extinction, it's comforting to know that he was around just long enough to see Kazam starring Shaq. But it wasn't just the popularization of field guides that led to the explosion in popularity of birding over the past century. There's another really important tool that I've yet to touch on. It's part of the iconic look that the stereotypical bird watcher always has. That's right, you know what I'm talking about. A tool with roots in the military, one that's become so popularized and mass-produced that nearly every household in America has at least one of them. That's right, I'm talking about cargo vests. Oh yeah, I guess binoculars are pretty helpful too. Binoculars were invented by somebody who I'm not going to credit by name because I refuse to believe that somebody in 1825 actually came up with the idea. I refuse to accept that for 200 years after telescopes were invented, nobody else had the idea of, oh hey, I wonder what would happen if we put two of them together. So here's the guy who took the credit for it, but I'm not going to even bother saying his name. Now there were the early birders of the 20th century that had binoculars and would use them for birding, but due to the cost of them as well as the lack of availability in terms of quality field guides, birding was a hobby almost exclusively for the upper crust. But as we all know, society is a big old loaf of bread, and the crust is only a tiny part of it, meaning birding was a very niche hobby back then. Luckily for us, 2 world wars happened, which led to the mass production of binoculars. This, combining with Peterson dropping his straight banger of a field guide, led to an awakening of sorts. Over the second half of the 20th century, birding only increased in popularity over each passing decade. For a good while, it was considered, really just an old person hobby, which even today it still does hold a bit of that stereotype. But over the past 30 years, it's exploded in popularity among younger people. And a big reason for this is because of a little thing called the internet. Now, if you're wondering what the internet is, no you're not. Why are you lying? But with the internet came a thing called eBird, which is a citizen science project where people basically just help collect data for the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Do this by uploading which species they see, the time and place into a virtual database, which provides useful data for ornithologists' research, while also being the perfect place for birders to learn which birds are in their area. This has led to birders gaining the ability to greater maximize the total number of birds that they could possibly see in a year. But I'm not going to get into that whole side of the hobby. If you want to know more about that, just watch the movie they made with Jack Black and Steve Martin. But I will warn you, apart from this movie basically being the Black Panther for birders, if you're not a birder, then you probably won't like it all too much.
Chicken?
With the development of smartphones, birding's now not only easier than it ever has been, but more accessible than it ever has been. Now, unless you're really into it, there's really no need to always carry around a field guide because you have the sum of all human knowledge on you at any given moment, which includes all known birds. The Merlin app, another banger by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, makes identifying birds something anybody can do. Now, it would still help memorizing and knowing hundreds of different birds like a lot of birders do, but for anybody trying to get into it, the learning curve is no longer as steep as it used to be. Because to be fair, most people don't want to just sit around reading field guides and memorizing what birds look like. So now it's possible for birding to be a lot more casual than it used to be. Over the past few years, there's been a new feature that's risen in popularity on the app that's slowly become almost entirely what people use the app for, and that's the Sound ID feature. One of the more difficult sides of birding is memorizing and learning bird calls, which is something that's hard for even some of the most avid birders. And this raises some questions like if this takes away from what people enjoy about birding to begin with. But really, it doesn't really seem like it would, because these are completely optional tools. But what's so valuable about them is they're making birding so much more accessible and easy to get into. Hell, I know a lot of people who aren't birders that still have this app and use the Sound ID whenever they get curious about a bird they hear. So getting into birding is now as easy as simply downloading an app. You know who's always on their dang phones? That's right, the youths. And by youths, I mean Gen Z and millennials, which, we're still pretty young, right? Right? Right now, birding is a rapidly growing hobby among millennials and Gen Z. You see, there's something that these two generations had that previous generations did not. An international phenomenon that, just like birding, involves a lot of categorization as well as itching that innate desire humans seem to have for collecting things. That's right, I'm talking about Pokemon. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. For previous generations, usually birding wasn't something you'd get into until later in your life, usually post-retirement. I mean, for a really long time, it was either that or stamp collecting. And because of Pokemon cards, we already got the whole stamp collecting side of it taken care of. Our fried dopamine receptor craved the next thing, which was Pokemon Go, but after, that came and went as a trend, we all still craved more. Pokemon Go showed that it was obvious that we all wish our life was like a video game, but all the Pokemon we were collecting were still digital. Many people hit a breaking point where they needed to find themselves some real life Pokemon, also known as animals. And with there being so many resources for looking for birds specifically, with all of them categorized, different types, different levels of rarity, it made for a pretty smooth transition. Now, as somebody who was obsessed with Pokemon as a kid, I can verify that birding gives that same little buzz that Pokemon does. I mean, for anybody who does bird, if you've seen anybody share their life list with somebody else, it's almost identical to a kid pulling out a binder full of Pokemon cards, or pulling out a Game Boy or DS and showing another kid their collection. So Pokemon has primed and loaded these younger generations to fall headfirst into birding, way earlier than previous generations would. Now don't get me wrong, not every member of the younger generations are birders, just like not everybody from the older generations are. However, more than a third of all Americans would say that they bird regularly. That's nearly 100 million people, and that's only the people that do it regularly. So let me finally get to the point of this video. Birding seems to scratch some sort of primordial itch we have as humans to not only catalog and categorize everything, but to just get so giddy and excited when we see something that we register as neat. Look, I know that there's countless people who not only show indifference towards birds, but actively despise them. But joke's on them. I mean, where are the birds gonna go? Are they just gonna vanish? Yes, sadly, since 1970, North America's lost 30% of its birds. That's about 3 billion birds gone. Now, this is due to a variety of reasons, but all of them are, surprise, surprise, anthropogenic. The big three are habitat loss, collisions with buildings and cars, and the introduction of invasive species. Here's a message to the youth who's still indifferent towards birds. That's right, I'm talking to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Oh, wait just a second. There we go. Birding has a way of sneaking up on you. You'll go your whole life maybe being able to identify a robin, or maybe if something's a seagull, but then out of nowhere, one day you'll just see a bird, and inexplicably you'll say out loud, "Oh, that's a bobolink." And from that point on, you're trapped. There's no going back. But I, for one, am not gatekeeping. I want everybody to start birding. So to end this, I would say I hope to see you out there. But honestly, if I'm out there, the only thing I'm hoping to see are some G-dang birds. Oh yeah, side note, but the bird cawing in the background at the start of this song is a blue jay.